Kong, hold fast, mate. Amanda Wilson, just say a few words. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Nina Marty.
There he is in the FX King.
Hey everybody, we are here in Brighton at the start of stage 2 of the men's Tour Down Under 2023. There's a massive crowd here. This is the most that I've seen so far. There's a real cool vibe in the air. Today they're riding 155 kilometres. It's the longest ride of their men's stage. They're going to go from Brighton all the way down to Victor Harbour. It's going to be stunning views. It's going to be amazing. I've ridden so many of those roads and yeah, it's spectacular down there. So we're going to watch them start here, but then later we're going to head over to the Tour Village and talk to Pat Jonker, who won the Tour Down Under in 2004, and just find out more about what it's like to ride in the Tour Down Under and what's going through their head and the difference between riding then and now and all of that kind of cool stuff. So now let's watch them start. It's a beautiful day. Look at the water, it's amazing.
They've got a king in the mountains.
So many people here. All right, let's go catch them start.
One.
Anticipation as the time draws near. In the south of the nation, the event of the year. People hope, the wheels never rest. Machines of steel face the ultimate test. Shaking like thunder.
My lever broke yesterday on the way to Tanunda and I had to take her for emergency surgery to my bike mechanic, and he had no other bar tape apart from some candy cane stuff. It looks good, right? No. Yeah. Oh, it does, right? Yeah. Yeah, it adds a bit of flair.
How's it right? It's Christmas.
It's Christmas. It's like, yeah.
Oh, it's like Italy.
Yeah, it's Italy, so we're like, yeah. Fuji supports Italy. I don't.
No. Spaghetti. Come stai oggi?
Oh, that's cool. Well, I think she's got a bit of flair now. All right, that was really cool to watch with all those people. Now we're going to head back to the Tour Village and catch up with Pat Jonker, winner of the 2004 Tour Down Under, and just get some inside knowledge on what it's like. Okay guys, we are here with Pat Jonker. He won the Tour Down Under back in 2004. And so we're going to have a chat with him today and just find out what it's like to ride in the Tour Down Under, to be a professional cyclist, and the difference between cycling back then and now. And so, yeah, first off, Pat, yeah, that's impressive that you won back in 2004.
Thanks for having me on Serafina. So I'll follow you on YouTube, and you got a lot of fans, and yeah, really admire what you do, and especially I think last year 300-kilometer ride. I think yeah, that was very impressive. So yeah, riding the actual Tour Down Under as a professional cyclist is obviously a lot of pressure to perform. I think that's why when you watch the footage on TV, you see a lot of crashes where people do really fight tooth and nail, and cycling is not a physical sport, but you'll find in a professional there's a lot of elbowing going on, and yeah, elbowing like that, yeah, there's a lot of that going on. People are overlapping wheels, and it's often when they overlap a wheel and that the crashes occur. So crashes have always been a part of the sport, unfortunately. That's why people like me are covered in scars. Professional cyclists will tell you, well, you don't have to be professional. Anyone who's competitive cyclist will tell you, regardless if you're amateur or whatever, that it can be a very physical sport, and you really need to be on a high level of focus and concentration. And it's that concentration and focus for hours on end that is as fatiguing sometimes as a 200-kilometer stage. So you'll be always thinking about you know, staying upright because you're always aware of the danger. So it is a physical sport. It's obviously everyone understands that it's a very physically hard sport because you're pedaling, you know, for hours on end with a heart rate of 160 or 180 beats a minute all day. It's also a physical, psychologically demanding sport, even more so than when I was younger or in my day, because the guys are really performing at a very, very intense level, and so they're mentally always very fatigued. There's a lot of mental fatigue and burnout, and we see a lot of riders do burn out maybe quicker than in my day. So it's definitely become more not competitive, it's faster, aggressive, and there's a lot more at stake. There's actually a lot more money to be made today, so the guys are earning a very good salary, and when you put money into the equation of young men who are hungry, then you've got all these perfect ingredients of young men, a sport that's very hard and physical, and then some real financial gains to be made. They are riding for sheep stations, and they're willing to crash in order to get that victory. The stage 2 of the Tour Down Under from Brighton to Victor Harbour, and you know, going into the last corner, the bunch wasn't sprinting for the win because Rowan Dennis and Jay Vine were ahead in a small group, and they took first and second. But the guys behind, you know, there may only be room for, you know, going into the last corner, there'll be 6 wide, but there will be only room for 4 people. So, and whoever breaks loses. So there's a real mentality, you break, you lose. And that's unfortunately the consequences are there's a lot of crashes, and we saw Robert Gasink, I think, break his hip yesterday, and a few riders are already at home or at the hospital, and yeah, that's part of the sport. Yeah, part of the sport.
So how does it compare from when you were racing to now? So the bikes are different.
Yeah.
The bikes are, how much of an advantage does that give people now?
Yeah. The bikes today are really amazing. They're like real super bikes. You know, most have disc brakes. The bikes in my day, so we're talking early 2000s, the bikes were definitely not as aerodynamic. So the bikes were light. In my time, the bikes were light. But what they found was it's not so much about a light bike, it's about an aerodynamic bike. So the bikes today are very aerodynamic. So put them in a wind tunnel and there's very little drag. So the bikes are very stiffer, super aerodynamic, still lightweight, and the braking power they have today is they've got a lot of braking power, which we didn't have in old days. We had rim brakes, and you kind of in the wet, you didn't have that kind of braking.
And you're ready to ride as your first race. What's going through your head? Like what? And then it goes and you off. What's going through your head?
You know, we have a coach or a director sportif in a team car who has a radio, and we're in constant radio communication with a car. So
you're listening to people talking to you the whole time.
So we got an earpiece in there. We have a little earpiece, and we're constantly listening to what the coach or director sportif is talking about the wind. They're talking about a race situation. We're constantly getting information in our earpiece, and we're able to communicate with each other. So on a race day, we don't, obviously when our heart rate's 190, we're not talking very much, but there's a bit of chit chat going on about who's feeling good, and you have to be honest about how you're feeling, and you know how the team leader's going and how he's feeling, and it's chit chat all day. And then the last hour or two of the race, when it's full bore, there's only a little bit of chit chat because we can't talk. But yeah, we're always looking at the hills that are coming up, the wind direction, and we're also always thinking about refueling the body. Really seeing the human body as a machine, in a sense that we know we will need to take in 80 grams of carbohydrates an hour. We need to hydrate with 500, 600 milliliters of electrolytes and energy drinks an hour. So we're always, it's not so that when you're cycling that you can switch off mentally. You actually have to switch on mentally, and because if you don't rehydrate or replenish your calories, you're going to hit the wall. There's a difference between riding a training ride of 200-kilometer training ride than racing. So as soon as there's a number on the bike and a number on your back, yeah, with that becomes it becomes stress. Today's athlete is definitely more stressed out than in my day, where it was a little bit more relaxed. We're still very serious athletes, but today it's a hyper level of because there are only so many world tour spots. There's only so many professional positions available at the highest level, and it's probably thousands and thousands of cyclists who want to be in that position. So you're always looking, if you have a bad few months or a bad year, you could be kicked out of the world tour very quickly. There's always someone who wants your spot. We have a month off a year. Most athletes will have 1 month off, where for a couple of weeks they'll just get into the ice cream and cookies and put on some fat. That's the best time of the year, is off season. Everyone loves off season. It's like nothing like an offie where you can hit the Häagen-Dazs ice cream and have some shit food and drink some more alcohol than you normally do. Although riders do drink alcohol during the whole year to whatever reasons. But yeah, the big thing, the hardest thing about cycling is having to be very low body fat. So most of the athletes are under 10% body fat, 8% body fat, and anyone who knows to maintain such low body fat, that's extremely difficult, and discipline is a superpower. If you can have, if you have a discipline as an athlete, that's a gift. Yeah, discipline is a key word. You know, talk about dedication, determination, but it all comes down to discipline, because it is the hardest sport. A lot of athletes will tell you it's probably one of the hardest sports there is on the planet. Is cycling, road cycling, 3-week races like Tour de France, or a week race like Tour Down Under. Because there's sacrifices you make, you know, you train hard and then you can't eat much.
Riding in the Tour Down Under, so you've also ridden in the Tour de France.
Yeah, Tour de France is a bit different, yes.
Yeah, how different is that? I mean, we're here at the Tour Down Under,
yeah.
And we don't want to talk too much about the Tour de France because we're here in Australia, but what is the difference in that? Like, how does that feel competing in that compared to competing in the Tour Down Under?
Yeah, the Tour de France is like a childhood dream, and then when you get there, you find out it's a nightmare. Yeah, it's a dream, and then you get there and you go, this is a friggin' nightmare. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the most pain I've ever endured. Suffering, I've never suffered so much in my life as during a Tour de France. You can, you're so dehydrated sometimes that, there's a bit of blood in your urine. You're throwing up sometimes because you can't keep the food down. It's 3 weeks of a lot of suffering and enduring, but I think what you learn is that if you can mentally, all those obstacles in front of you, if you can break them down in little manageable pieces mentally and not think about a 3-week race, but think of it as a 1-day event and try and get to the halfway mark each day. So you've got to learn to think differently. If you've got a massive obstacle to overcome, you have to get that obstacle and chop it in many different little pieces and just eat one little piece at a time, because the Tour de France will just overwhelm you and crush you. It crushes most people. I crashed at my first Tour de France, and I got to 3 days before Paris, and then I had to pull out through my injuries through the fall, but also through mental exhaustion and physical exhaustion. When I was about to give up and pull out the Tour de France, and then because I felt physically exhausted and ready to pull out, and then my team said, well, what you should do is go in an early attack, in an early breakaway, and see how you go, and if you're not good by the halfway mark, well then you can pull out, go home. But what happened was, I'm in the early breakaway attack, and then people started shouting my name, and there's a helicopter filming me, and there's motorbikes filming me, and all of a sudden I got a bit of adrenaline, and all of a sudden optimism started to creep in, and all of a sudden the brain is releasing dopamine and all these feel-good hormones. I couldn't believe how I could in 1 day change the way I felt, and that had a lot to do with, if you have nothing to lose anymore and it's all over, then risk it all and roll the dice, and you may well find that the hidden reservoirs of energy will come out, and you could do things you never ever thought you could do. And that's an extraordinary experience, and a lot of athletes can tell you that, especially endurance sports.
What tips, or have you got any words for young cyclists who might want to do it there in the Tour de
Yeah, you know, if you're a young kid and, a boy or girl, because the Women's Tour de France is a big thing too now. So, there's no discriminating. Men and women can both do the Tour de France. And the big thing is optimism, and try and be optimistic when you're at your worst. So when you're absolutely exhausted and you're tired and you can't pedal anymore, to remain optimistic.
Yeah, and so practice that in your day-to-day life, right?
Yeah, optimism.
Yeah, optimism in everything. Awesome, thank you, Pat. Appreciate that. Thanks, guys.